Part 1, The Nightmare Begins. The first thing Liam Carter felt was motion, a violent, uneven shaking that made his skull rattle against something metal. For a few seconds, he didn't know where he was. Then the smell hit him, stale beer, gasoline, and sea salt. He was lying in the back of a vehicle, his body twisted among crumpled sleeping bags and empty cans. When he tried to sit up, pain spiked through his forehead like a drill. The sound of gravel crunching beneath tires vibrated through his ribs. "Where the hell are we?" he croaked, his voice raw from dehydration. From the front seat came a hoarse laugh. "Black Hollow, man," said Jax, his best friend since high school, his worst influence since forever. Jax looked back with bloodshot eyes and a grin that hadn't faded since the night before. "Told you, but you were too drunk to remember. Private beach. No tourists till 10. Behind the wheel, Nate, quiet, sharp-featured, and perpetually unimpressed, reached back and tossed something over his shoulder. It smacked into Liam's forehead, a half-empty Gatorade bottle, the blue kind that always looked radioactive. "Drink before you puke on my seats," Nate said flatly. Liam drank. The liquid tasted wrong, too salty, metallic. Like water that had been filtered through a rusted pipe. "Jesus," he muttered. "That's disgusting." Jax just laughed again, the sound loud in the tight cabin. "Best cure for a hangover's salt and sugar." "You're welcome." Outside, the world was a blur of fog and pine trees, the dirt road a red vein cutting through miles of wilderness. Liam leaned his head against the cold glass and watched dawn bleed across the horizon, a slow-spreading red that made the mist look like smoke from some unseen fire. He thought of her then, the way she had walked out 2 weeks ago, voice calm but eyes full of something that cut deeper than anger. "You build houses for everyone but us, Liam. You can't even build a future." He hadn't fought back. Just let her go. The Land Rover jolted violently over a rut, snapping him out of it. They reached the coast as the sun began to rise. The beach was smaller than he'd imagined, a black crescent hemmed in by cliffs, their peaks choked with pine. The sand wasn't the bright, golden kind he'd seen in tourist ads. It was dark, nearly charcoal, and the closer he looked, the more it seemed to shimmer with something oily. A single pickup truck was parked near the dunes, its doors shut, windows fogged. "Creepy-ass place," Nate muttered. "Creepy and empty," Jax countered, grinning. "Which means it's perfect." He stripped off his shirt, tossed it onto the hood, and sprinted into the waves before anyone could argue. The cold didn't slow him down. Liam followed more slowly. The wind bit at his skin. The air smelled sharp, briny and metallic, like the Gatorade. He waded in up to his knees before stopping. The water was colder than he'd expected, so cold it burned. Then something strange happened, the chill seemed to travel upward, crawling along his spine, fizzing like static. He froze. For a moment, he could swear someone was watching him. But when he looked around, there was no one, just Jack splashing in the distance and Nate unpacking beer from the cooler. Still, the feeling stayed. The sun climbed higher. The mist began to lift. Jax was far out now, his laughter echoing faintly. Nate had joined him, floating on his back. Liam dove under, hoping the cold would sober him up completely. The water swallowed him whole, dark, silent. At first, he saw only silt and shells scattered across a smooth grey bed. Then the color began to change. The grey dulled to brown, then black, a slick, glistening layer of mud that seemed to move with the current. Liam frowned. He swam closer, squinting. The sand wasn't still. It pulsed. He kicked lower, reaching out a hand, and froze. There was a hole down there. A perfect circle, maybe 3 feet wide, ringed with pale, jagged shapes that looked disturbingly like teeth. A faint ripple expanded from its edge, as though the thing beneath had just exhaled. "What the hell?" Before he could finish, a crab scuttled across the sand and straight over the edge of the hole. For half a second, it dangled there, legs twitching. Then it was gone, sucked downward in utter silence. The sand sealed itself shut, leaving no trace. Liam bolted to the surface, gasping. He staggered out of the water, collapsed onto the wet sand, and vomited until his stomach was empty. Nate came running over. "Jesus, you okay?" "There's something down there," Liam rasped, shaking. "Something alive." Nate looked past him toward the water. "You just hung over, man." Then came the sound, a splash so loud it echoed off the cliffs. They both turned. The place where Jack's had been moments ago was empty. Only a few ripples spread outward, fading fast. "Jack's?" Nate shouted. Nothing. The wind had picked up, whispering through the pines. The ocean hissed softly, like breathing. They split up without needing to speak, Nate running back into the surf, Liam skirting the cliffside, scanning the water. 10 minutes passed. 15. No sign of him. Then Nate's voice tore through the air, raw, panicked. "Liam! Over here!" Liam spun around. Out in the water, Nate was thrashing, one arm raised. Then, without warning, he was gone, yanked down so fast the surface barely rippled. Liam sprinted. The cold bit deep into his legs as he plunged into the surf again. He dove. And saw something he would never unsee. The hole was back, wider now. From it emerged a mouth, enormous, circular, lined with crystal-like teeth that shimmered in the filtered light. 2 eyes stared from the sand, black and wet and unblinking. A single leg, Nate's, jutted from the jaws, the shark tattoo still visible on his calf. Then the teeth closed. Blood spiraled upward in delicate ribbons. Liam's body locked. The water vibrated with a deep hum, a sound that felt alive, ancient. The thing exhaled, clouds of sand billowing from beneath it like smoke. Its head rose higher, flat and spined, eyes gleaming like marbles. A stargazer, his brain supplied faintly. A bottom-feeding fish that buried itself in sand, waiting for prey. But this one was huge, impossibly huge, easily the size of a car, its body pulsing with veins that glowed faintly blue. And it wasn't alone. Another shadow moved beneath it, smaller but fast. Liam shot upward, breaking the surface with a scream. He stumbled through the shallows, feet bleeding from the rocks. Something brushed his ankle, a tug, strong enough to almost pull him under again. He kicked free and ran, half crawling, up the sand toward the car. Behind him, the water boiled. He didn't look back. He threw himself into the Land Rover, slammed the door, jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, then roared. He gunned the accelerator. The tires spun, digging deep trenches into the soft sand before catching traction. The vehicle lurched forward, bouncing up the dirt path, away from the bay. Through the rear window, he saw it, the sand bulging, swelling like something beneath was rolling over. Then it deflated, the beach falling silent again. The cliffs closed in as he sped away. By the time Liam reached the forest road, the sun was up and his hands were shaking so violently he could barely steer. The review mirror showed only trees, but every so often, he thought he saw movement in the corner of his vision, a faint flicker of red beneath the sand-colored dust on the window. He didn't stop driving until the road widened into asphalt again. When he finally pulled over, his breathing came in short, wheezing bursts. On the passenger seat sat Jax's sunglasses, cracked and dripping salt water. The Gatorade bottle rolled onto the floor. The liquid inside wasn't blue anymore. It had turned a dull, cloudy red. Liam stared at it for a long time, unable to move. He could still taste salt on his tongue. And beneath that, iron. Somewhere, far behind him, the waves crashed softly against the black shore, covering the evidence, smoothing it all away. Part 2: The Depths Feed. They found him just after 8 in the morning, barefoot, soaked to the knees, crouched beside his Land Rover on the edge of Highway 104. His hands were caked with sand, his pupils, blown wide as if he'd stared into the sun too long. When the police arrived, he didn't resist. He didn't say much at all. The officer who first spoke to him, Constable Moran, later described it in his report. The subject was trembling and appeared disoriented. Claimed his friends had been taken by something under the sand. Repeated the word air breathing as several times. They took him to Halifax General. The nurse who cleaned the cuts on his feet asked him if he'd been in a fight. No, he whispered. It was the beach. She smiled like she thought he was making a joke. 2 divers were dispatched that afternoon. The tide was high and the fog had rolled in thick, but they went down anyway. They found no bodies. No blood. Not even torn fabric. But they did find something odd, 2 large depressions in the seabed, almost symmetrical, roughly 2 meters wide each. One of the divers later described them as like the outline of something that had been lying there, waiting. The report went nowhere. Black Hollow wasn't a popular beach, and the province didn't want another public scare. The official conclusion came 2 days later. Presumed drowning under the influence of alcohol. Case closed. Liam didn't argue. He couldn't. He left Nova Scotia the following week, driving straight through the night back to his apartment in Oregon, stopping only for gas and bad coffee. He never told his family what happened, only that Jax and Nate were gone, and he didn't want to talk about it. For a while, he convinced himself it was over. He deleted his photos of the trip, boxed up the fishing gear, and buried it in the closet. But sleep never came easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back there, the taste of salt on his tongue, the pressure of cold water crushing his chest, the faint shape of something moving under the black. The dreams weren't violent, not at first. Just persistent. He'd see himself standing on a shore, the sand moving gently beneath his feet, like a heartbeat. The air smelled of iron and rot. Then a sound, a slow, heavy inhale, followed by a wet sigh. He'd wake drenched in sweat, his mouth dry, his throat full of that same taste, of blood and salt. It was 2 weeks later when the first real sign appeared. He was in the kitchen late one night, half drunk on cheap whiskey, scrolling through news articles about unexplained sinkholes along the Atlantic coast. He told himself it was coincidence, just geological nonsense. But he kept reading until the words blurred together. When he finally looked up, there was sand on the floor. A small patch of it near the back door, fine, black grains that glittered faintly under the light. He thought maybe he'd tracked it in somehow. He grabbed a paper towel, wiped it up, threw it away. The next morning, the same patch was there again. That's when he noticed the smell. Faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, the briny, metallic tang that had haunted him since that morning at the bay. He opened every window. It didn't help. By the 3rd night, he stopped drinking. He started hearing it around then, a low, rhythmic hiss, barely audible, like someone whispering from another room. At first, he thought it was the plumbing. But it came at strange hours, at 3 a.m., for 17, always when the house was silent. Once, he followed the sound down the hallway to the bathroom. The tiles were cold under his feet. The sink was dry. The sound was coming from the drain. He crouched, holding his breath. The hiss grew louder. Then, for a second, he could swear he heard something else beneath it, a wet, rasping inhale. He jerked back so fast he slammed into the wall. When he turned on the light, the drain was bubbling. A faint plume of black water swirled up before sinking again. He didn't sleep at all that night. He called the police the next morning, said it was a break-in, though even he didn't believe it. When they came, he couldn't explain the sand in the corners, the wet footprints that didn't match his shoe size, or the faint smudges on the window like fingertips pressed from the outside. One officer, a young woman with tired eyes, gave him a long look. "You sure you're not under any medication, Mr. Carter?" He nodded. She didn't believe him. They left soon after. The silence that followed felt worse than any noise. He tried to move on again. Went back to work on a small renovation project near the docks. Hammered nails, sanded floors, kept busy. It almost worked, until he saw the wood. The planks he'd cut that morning were soaked at the ends, as if they'd been dipped in water. When he touched one, it left a smear of dark residue on his fingers. He lifted them to his nose. Salt. The next day, the same thing happened. Then again the day after that. By the weekend, he'd quit. Told his boss he was sick. The truth was, he couldn't stand the sound of running water anymore. Even showers made him flinch. He bought a small tape recorder, the kind journalists use, and started documenting what he saw, what he heard. He thought maybe if he recorded it, it would make sense. Day 7, one of the tapes begins, his voice strained. There's sand again in the hallway. I cleaned it twice. It's black, like the stuff from the bay. I can smell it even when I'm not near it. I think it's coming from the vents. Later in the same recording, he starts whispering. It's breathing. I swear it's breathing. The floor was moving. I felt it under my hand. The tape ends with a scraping sound and a single word, faint but clear, a help. 3 days later, his neighbor called the landlord to complain about flooding. When the maintenance guy came to check, he found water pooling under Liam's door, not clear water, but murky and dark, leaving stains that shimmered faintly blue under light. Liam was inside, sitting in the middle of the living room, completely dry, eyes fixed on the carpet. It's underneath, he said when they asked what happened. It followed me. They took him to the hospital that night for observation. The janitor who cleaned the apartment afterward quit 2 days later. She told her sister she'd found something alive in the carpet, tiny movements, as if the fibers were breathing. When she came back the next morning to show the manager, the carpet was perfectly still. The doctors kept Liam for 3 nights. They ran tests, gave him sedatives, kept the lights low. On the 4th day, he asked for a phone. He logged into Reddit. The username was an old one, Liam Carter 84. The post he made was short, shaky, half confession, half warning. No sleep, something in the sand. 2 of my friends disappeared off the coast of Nova Scotia last month. The police called it a drowning. But I saw it happen. There was something under the sand, alive, waiting. I thought it was over, but I was wrong. It followed me home. If you ever find a beach where the sand is black and the water smells like metal, don't go in. It breathes. He posted it at 3:02 a.m. By sunrise, it had over 3,000 upvotes. Most of the comments said the same thing, great story, creepy vibe, 10/10 would read again. A few asked if it was real. Liam never replied. The hospital staff found him later that morning, sitting cross-legged on his bed, staring at the window. On the sill was a small pile of damp sand. The nurse brushed it away with a tissue, shivering at the faint smell of salt that lingered after. Part 3: The Hunger Under the Sand. The drive back to Nova Scotia was quiet. Liam didn't speak, didn't call anyone, didn't even turn on the radio. The map on his phone glowed faintly on the passenger seat, the route tracing a lonely line from Oregon to Halifax. Every mile brought memories, the red dawn over Black Hollow, the cold shock of the water, the sound of teeth closing on flesh. It had been 6 months. 6 months of nightmares, of waking drenched in sweat, of hearing soft hissing and scraping beneath his apartment floorboards. He had tried to live normally, even forced himself to sleep in a bed instead of on a recliner. But the sand, the smell, the breathing, had never left him. And now, sitting behind the wheel of a rental, he knew why he was returning. He couldn't let it go. He had to know what had taken Jax and Nate, what had followed him home, what had haunted him since that first sunrise. The first sight of Black Hollow brought the same dread he had felt the day it had consumed his friends. The beach looked empty, deceptively calm. The sand was black, smooth, gleaming faintly in the morning light. Mist drifted up from the tide, curling around jagged cliffs like smoke from a dying fire. He parked the Land Rover where they had before, heart hammering. He grabbed a flashlight, a small pry bar, and the hunting knife he had kept hidden in his jacket. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to turn around, but he couldn't. Not now. The first step onto the sand sent a jolt up his leg, the memory of water sucking at him, pulling him under. He froze. The beach was empty. No waves, no birds, no driftwood, only the black sand and the cliffs. He took a deep breath and walked forward, toward the water. It was then he saw it, a slight ripple, like a shadow moving beneath the sand. His stomach tightened. He knelt down, letting the tip of his knife scrape the surface. The sand gave way like wet clay, forming a shallow depression, and then moved again, faster this time, as if something large was stirring beneath it. The hairs on his arms stood on end. He knew it wasn't a trick of the light. And then he heard it, the breathing. Deep, wet, alive. He swallowed. "Jax." "Nate," he whispered. His voice sounded small, insignificant. He knew they were gone, but saying their names made it real. The tide crept closer. Liam could see shapes in the water, or perhaps shadows beneath it, slowly undulating, feeding on the sand like some underwater predator. One depression swelled, the edges cracking as if something beneath was forcing its way upward. He stepped back, knife ready. The first one erupted from the sand like a black wave. Its head was flat and spined, the glassy triangular teeth reflecting the weak sunlight. The stargazer. Liam's heart slammed in his chest. Its eyes, black and wide as tennis balls, locked on him immediately. He ran. The sand seemed to resist him, sucking at his boots, his ankles, his legs. The creature moved faster than it should, gliding beneath the surface like water. Another shape rose beside it, smaller but equally monstrous. Liam stumbled, almost falling. He spun the knife, stabbing at the sand, but it passed through harmlessly. He cursed, grabbing the pry bar from his belt. The smaller stargazer lunged. Its teeth snapped inches from his leg. He slammed the bar into the sand with all his strength. There was a deep, wet crunch, and the sand shivered violently. The smaller creature hissed, retreating slightly. He ran toward the water, knife and bar ready. The larger stargrazer's head rose, teeth gleaming, spines rippling like toxic veins. It opened its mouth slowly, the sound wet and sucking, the smell of iron and brine filling his nostrils. Liam paused at the shoreline. He remembered what had happened before, the way it had pulled Nate under, how the water had seemed to own him. But he wasn't running this time. Not entirely. He plunged forward, knife raised. The sand gave way under his boots, cold and oily. The stargazer lunged, its jaws snapping just above his head. He dove to the side, stabbing blindly into the dark sand. A scream, somewhere deep and wet, echoed across the bay. It was not his. It was Jax's, or Nate's, or maybe both. Liam didn't stop to think. The knife struck something hard. He yanked it free and saw what he had pierced, one of the teeth, lodged deep in the creature's upper jaw. The stargazer shrieked, a sound that made his teeth ache. It recoiled, thrashing, pulling a small wave of water with it. The smaller stargazer attacked again. Liam swung the pry bar like a club, smashing the sand in front of it. The creature hissed and lunged sideways. Liam rolled to his feet and ran toward the cliffs, hoping to find firmer ground. The larger one surged after him. He could see its spine slicing through the surf, the black scent bubbling where it moved. His foot caught on a root, sending him tumbling to his knees. The water lapped at his chest. Then he saw something gleaming in the shallows, Jax's sunglasses, cracked and half buried in sand. They were a beacon, proof that this was real. Proof he could fight. He grabbed a broken driftwood log nearby, hefted it, and swung it with all his strength. It slammed against the creature's spined head. There was a wet, resonant crack. The stargazer shrieked, rearing back, then slid under the water again. Liam didn't wait. He ran. The tide rose around him, sucking at his boots, pulling at his legs. The smaller stargazer lunged once more. He swung the pry bar again. Metal met chitin, and a sharp, wet sound rang out. The creature yelped, an animalistic, desperate sound, and recoiled. He climbed onto a rock, dripping, exhausted, knife in one hand, bar in the other. The two stargrazers paused at the water's edge. Black scent hissed around them. Liam could see their teeth glinting, their eyes unblinking, their spines twitching like snakes ready to strike. And then, miraculously, they withdrew. Slowly, deliberately, sinking back beneath the sand, disappearing from view. The water stilled. The bay returned to its false calm. Liam collapsed onto the rock, gasping, blood running down his leg from cuts the sand had inflicted. He could still hear something, faint breathing beneath the black sands, subtle and insistent. But it was distant now, retreating, as if the creatures had finally decided to leave him alive. He stayed there for hours, watching, shaking, waiting for them to rise again. But the sun climbed higher, the fog lifted, and the tide began